Well, I want to welcome all of you who are joining us at one of our Atlanta area locations, those of you who are joining us across the country and around the world. It's really my honor to be able to lead us and navigate us over the next couple of weeks as we jump into something new. Today, I want to start with a question. I'm just curious to take a poll, and I want you to join us wherever you are. I'd love for you to participate in this poll. How many of you, just real quick, by show of hands, how many of you think today there are more distractions than there were 10 years ago? Anybody, how many of you think more? Wow, that's a big number in this room. How many of you think there's less? Anybody think there's less? No hands. Anybody, same number? Same number of distractions? Okay, so this is good. I don't even have to onboard you to the idea that this is a big problem in our world. So we're like jumping ahead. I could probably skip half the talk, but I won't because I worked hard on it. So there's a lot of distractions in our world. And you have to admit, we see this all over the place, but there are some people you just don't want to be distracted, right? Like there's some people in your life, as you travel, as you do things, as you go about life, there's some people you just don't want to be distracted, like this guy right here. Just notice this guy's face right here. He tells it all about how you don't want your surgeon checking sports scores during the middle of surgery. Or this guy right here, and maybe it's hard to tell, I don't know if you can see the little airplanes here, but this guy's the air traffic controller, getting caught playing solitaire during work. Or here's another one. If you've ever done this, if you ever gone skydiving, you do not want the person who packed your chute to be distracted while they're packing your chute, because literally some distractions can be fatal. Now, it's not all distractions. The distractions that most of us deal with on a regular basis, they're not all fatal or have the potential to be fatal, but they're not inconsequential either. Like, you don't want this person to be distracted, right? Like, you end up with a really bad haircut. Or if you're into tattoos, like, this is not a good look for you. If your tattoo artist gets distracted, you have no regrets. And then there's this guy, which I just have to say, some of you remember this stage. I thought we were out of this stage a few months ago. We should have been out of this stage until one of my little guys, who will remain nameless, made a mess all over the place. And it was because he's playing a game on his iPad while he's on the toilet. Speaking of distractions. And when I went, I'm like, what are you doing? Like, buddy, you have to focus on what you're doing. His answer was, well, at least my iPad didn't get any on it. So we have a long way to go in our household. I'm certainly not perfect at this. Some of you know this as well. There's all sorts of distractions in the workplace that hinder productivity. In fact, there was a study done about the top 5 productivity killers. Any guesses on number 1, top 5 productivity killers at work? Yeah, cell phones. Cell phones is number 1. Number 2, connected to number 1, anybody? The internet. And so these are the top 2, and when you look at the statistics on how much productivity that these reduce organizations by, it's staggering. And it's followed by gossip and social media and personal email. And if you notice, 4 of the 5 on the list are related to technology. It's because in our world, technology has increased the number of distractions over the years. Now, before we get to that, I want to talk about this word for a second, because this word distraction, distractions, it's actually instructive. The idea of this word and where it comes from is important, and it helps us understand specifically what this word is all about. So distractions comes from a Latin word. It's called distrahere. Distrahere is the Latin word. Anybody take Latin in high school? Anybody? Okay. So you can correct me if I'm wrong. Dis means apart, and trahere means to drag or to draw. And if you think about it, this is exactly what happens, right? It's exactly what happens in our minds and in our brains, is there's no shortage of things that drag or draw apart our attention from things. And we intend to focus on certain things, but what happens is your brain's amazing, and it has the ability to think of 2 things at once, which I'm actually amazed all the time when I'm speaking. I'll see somebody, or I'll think of something else, and literally words are coming out of my mouth as I'm thinking about something else. And that's dangerous, because it often causes me to say the wrong things or things that I regret later. Hopefully that won't happen today. But your brain has this amazing ability to go in so many different directions at one time, or as we think at one time. It has an amazing ability to hold within it so many different neural connections to a lot of different things in life, different aspects of your life. And what happens is oftentimes our attention gets distracted from the things that we intended on focusing on. Our attention isn't on what we were intending for it to be on. And so here's what happens. I mean, if you think about how these overlap, what distractions are doing is they're actually pulling these two things apart, which, as you know, focus is pulling them together. But this represents your ability to focus, and this represents your productivity. But what distractions does is it tries to pull your attention away from your intention. You've experienced this before. You intended to do one thing. You intended to get a number of things done, and then other things took your attention away from your intention. And because your attention got taken away and sort of undermined your intention, most of us, we got distracted. And here's the thing, we're culpable in this. A lot of times, there's distraction around us. I have 4 of them that live in my house, but there's distractions around us that pull us away from important tasks all the time. But most of us, we're culpable because we think we're good at multitasking, right? Like, how many multitaskers in the room? You're good at multitasking? Liars, you all multitask, and you think you're good at it. This is the amazing part. Earl Miller, he's a neuroscientist, a cognitive systems neuroscientist from MIT. He says it's an illusion. In fact, from the neurochemistry in your brain, multitasking is actually just an illusion. As humans, he says, we have a very limited capacity for simultaneous thought. We can only hold a little bit of information in the mind at any single moment. You don't actually multitask, you task switch. This is what's happening in your brain. You task switch. This waste times, makes you error prone, and decreases your ability to be creative. Linda Stone, who's a researcher, she worked on a project called the Attention Project, and she discovered that multitasking is actually possible, but it's only possible when you're involved in one cognitive task and one mindless task, like you're listening to a podcast while you're eating. You need to focus on the podcast, but you can basically eat pretty mindlessly. So we try to import that into all areas of our life. The problem is, due to the integration of technology in our lives and in our world, it's common for most of us to routinely engage in 2 tasks requiring cognitive ability simultaneously. And so, because of that, this is amazing, we have a new social disorder, as if we needed another one of those. There's a new social disorder that's actually clinically been called continuous partial attention. And people live with this. Full transparency, I need this series as much as anybody. Preparing for this series on distractions, I almost hit a concrete column in the Buckhead Church parking lot on my phone searching for books on focus. True story. And when I found it, I had already read 4 of the 5 books. And clearly they didn't help me. But it's crazy how many people live with this in their lives, this continuous partial distraction. And it's crazy that we even need a law restricting us from using our smartphones while operating a heavy piece of machinery going 70 to 80 miles an hour down the highway. But I do need that law to keep me from using my phone, and so do many of you. Because many in our society, many of us, if we're honest, we live in a constant state of distraction. And the new technology that we've had, it's programming us to do so. This continuous state of partial attention is, in reality, what it is it's a loss of focus, which it's like, duh, but this is why this is important. A loss of focus in reality is actually a lack of vision. Now, this is really what I want to talk about today, because when you lack vision in your life, the wisdom writer in the scriptures, you may not even know this came from the Bible, but he said that when where there is no vision, the people perish. And you may think, well, I mean, is it really that fatal? But I want you to think about this for a minute. When there's no vision or a loss of focus in a relationship, relationships die. When there's no focus on your dreams, the dreams get snuffed out. Organizations break down. When there's a lack of focus and a lack of vision, things die, things deteriorate. And even if you have a vision for whatever, for your life, for your marriage, for your family, for your organization, for your future, the truth is, a loss of focus is essentially the same thing as losing sight of your vision. You have a lack of vision. You're not really aiming towards something when you lose sight of what you're aiming toward. Now, many of us have lost out. You've missed out significantly due to distracted lives. For some of you, this happened professionally. Urgent things crowded out important things. And this is as small as you missed a deadline, or you lost the deal, or you were short on your, on your quota, or you didn't get the promotion. And then some of us have experienced this relationally, and the stakes are a little higher there, and you didn't prioritize a certain relationship. And now there's distance in your marriage. There's little substance in relationship with your parents. For some of us, there's resentment from our kids because in a season we were distracted from that relationship and from prioritizing that relationship, and we had vision, we had desire, we had intention, but our attention got dragged away. It undermined our intention. Now, 25 years ago, I heard Andy, our senior pastor, unpack a story involving a guy named Nehemiah, and it was transformational in my 20s, and it was essential in my 30s and 40s, and I want to talk to you a little bit about that story today in connection to this idea of distraction. So a little bit of backstory on Nehemiah. Here's a quick, I need to take a quick drink of water. Quick backstory and a history lesson on Nehemiah. We have to go back, and again, this is just, be with me for a second if you're not into history. In 587 BC, Jerusalem came under siege. It was a series of campaigns that took Jerusalem and destroyed the temple of God that Solomon built. And so what happened was at that time, the Babylonians captured the Israelites and carried a bunch of them off toward Babylon. And so there were a bunch of Israelites that were led into exile. In 539 BC, though, Cyrus, he was the king of the Medes and the Persians. You probably remember this from high school, or you probably don't, but you were taught it. The Medes and the Persians took over the Babylonians, and King Cyrus was the one who conquered the Babylonians. Well, he had no interest in the Jewish people that were in exile, so he released the Jewish exiles, and he let them go back. And so Zerubbabel, which is just kind of fun to say, Zerubbabel led the first wave of exiles back to Jerusalem. So they're headed west back to Jerusalem, and they're going back primarily to rebuild the temple. And Zerubbabel was successful in that. 516, the temple reconstruction was completed, and things were on a good track. The people of God started to worship God in his temple again. And then Ezra, who was still in Babylon, he leads a second wave of people. Calling the people to return to God's law. And this didn't go well. In fact, Ezra, he took matters into his own hands, and families were destroyed, people were divided. I mean, you should go read the story. I don't have time to tell you the whole story. It's an amazing story, and in some ways it's tragic, and in some ways it's incredible and instructive and informative. But here's why this is important. In 446 BC, there's a report that comes back to Jerusalem, and this is where I want to pick up the story. And the report comes back, and Nehemiah is working next to the king. He's actually the king's cupbearer, and he's working next to the king, and this report comes back. And this is where we pick up the story. It says, I asked them, Nehemiah is speaking, I asked them about the Jews who had returned there, who returned to Jerusalem from captivity, and about how things were going in Jerusalem in general. And they said to me, things are not going well. For those who return to the province of Judah, they're in great trouble and disgrace. This is the people of God. This is Nehemiah's people. He goes on, he says, the wall of Jerusalem has been torn down, and the gates have been destroyed by fire. When I heard this, Nehemiah said, I sat down and I wept. In fact, for days I mourned and fasted and prayed to the God of heaven. Now, this is what strikes me strange about the story is this is not a new detail. I mean, the walls were destroyed and the city was burned before the people, many of them were carried off into exile. But this one detail that was included in the story by the writer, I think is important. In fact, it's a literary clue to one of the most important things that captured Nehemiah's heart. Nehemiah had also learned that the temple wasn't being maintained. They'd reconstructed, but it wasn't being maintained, and they weren't making the proper sacrifices, and people weren't living according to God's law. He learned about all these things, but he had fixated on this idea of the wall being destroyed and the boundaries around the city no longer being there. The ideas and the customs, because there was no wall, of the people outside and their religious practices from these surrounding nations, it infiltrated their community and was beginning to be embraced by the Jewish people. And so if we fast forward early the following spring, Nehemiah says, I was serving the king his wine as the cupbearer. He has an important job. He's trusted by the king. And I had never before appeared sad in his presence, in the presence of the king. So the king asked me, he said, why are you looking so sad? You don't look sick to me. You must be deeply troubled. And Nehemiah, I think he probably paused and he wondered, like, I don't know how this is gonna land on the king. He has his own kingdom. But this is what Nehemiah said. He said, how can I not be sad? For the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins, and the gates have been destroyed by fire. Once, the powerful nation that I was a part of, it's laying in ruins, it's being destroyed, and the walls surrounding the city have been torn down, and the city has been burned. Nehemiah had a burden. Some of you have heard this described as a holy discontent. Cal Newport, in his book, Deep Work, which I commend, it's a great book, especially if you're a leader, it's a fantastic book. Cal Newport, in his book, Deep Work, he identifies this as a terrifying longing. I'm gonna come back to this in just a minute. Sorry about my mic there. He describes this as a terrifying longing. And I love that description because when you think about it, that's what happens when you have something that you long for, you dream for, you have a vision for. In some ways, it's terrifying. But there's this deep burden inside of you. And this is where Nehemiah is. Now, the king was so moved by Nehemiah's sadness. I mean, he saw how sad he was and his deep longing that the king responded. He said this, how can I help you? Like, I can see you're troubled. You've been a faithful servant and I want to help. And so Nehemiah replied, and he said, if it pleased the king, and if you're pleased with me, your servant, send me to Judah to rebuild the city where my ancestors were buried. Now, this was a bit of a tall ask because Nehemiah is basically asking to go back and rebuild this city that once was powerful and it had conquered and it had successfully warded off all of its enemies, with God's help, of course. But Nehemiah is basically asking the king to sort of risk and go, hey, I'm gonna go back, I just wanna rebuild my city, but it could be rebuilding an empire or a power on the inside. But the king not only released him of his role, he resourced him with the support and the supplies that would be necessary. So it seems like things are looking up. Nehemiah's headed back, full head of steam. He's got the stuff he needs. He's got the people he needs. But immediately he's met with tons of threats and resistance from both the outside and on the inside. People outside the surrounding nations who were threatened by Jerusalem being rebuilt, and people within the city walls. And there were at least 3 unique distractions. As a matter of fact, next week we're gonna unpack those 3 distractions because there are 3 common distractions that we all deal with in our lives. But this all came to a head. All these distractions, all this resistance came to a head when the temple was nearing completion. And this is where I wanna land today. Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, these were leaders from the surrounding nations, and the rest of our enemies found out that I had finished rebuilding the wall and that no gaps remained, though we had not set up the doors in the gates. So the city hadn't been secured yet. So Sanballat and Geshem sent a message asking me to meet them at one of the villages in the plain of Oh No, which should be a literary clue to us. This wasn't originally written in English, but Nehemiah's smart. He knows what these guys are up to, and he knows they're up to no good. And so Nehemiah's response, you've probably heard this before, in this very famous statement. After they were asking him to come meet with them, he says, no, I can't do that. I'm doing a great work, and I cannot come down. Nehemiah was aiming his life towards something of significant value. And in fact, the invitation didn't just come once. 4 more times the invitation came to Nehemiah, and 4 times he gave them back the same response. I'm doing a great work and I can't come down. I'm doing a great work and I can't come down. But by the 5th time, it came with the request came up with a made-up story. It was sort of, hey, listen, we're gonna report back to the king. King Cyrus, we're gonna report back to him that you have secret ambitions and that you're really plotting a rebellion. And they said, we're gonna report back to him if you don't come meet with us. But even in the midst of that, Nehemiah didn't budge. He wasn't gonna be drawn apart. He wasn't gonna be dragged apart. He wasn't gonna let his attention be drawn away from the thing that he had come back and intended to do. Here's my question. Before we get to some of the specific distractions next week, how is that possible? What made that possible? I mean, how is it? What was Nehemiah's secret? How do you stay that focused? And some of us, if you're a business leader, you lead a family, you're trying to raise humans, you're trying to lead an organization, you're trying to lead a school. I mean, this is something we all struggle with. I mean, how is it that Nehemiah stays laser focused in the midst of all these distractions? Because we all have the temptation at times to be pulled away. And I think it was connected to this terrifying longing. I mean, Nehemiah's response about his sadness was, how can I not be sad? I mean, how can this not overcome me? How can this not consume me? For the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins, and the gates have been destroyed by fire. You see, for Nehemiah, the wall, this boundary around the city, it represented so much more. It was a physical symbol of God's faithfulness to this promised land he had given his people. And Nehemiah was convicted that rebuilding the wall, both functionally and symbolically, would be the symbol of the thing that would begin to restore God's people as a chosen and set apart people. And he was burdened. He had this terrifying longing inside of him, and it both captured and required his full attention. David Brooks, who wrote a book called The Art of Focus, he said, if you want to win the war for attention, don't try to say no to trivial distractions. Try to say yes to the subject that arouses a terrifying longing, and let that terrifying longing crowd out everything else. And that's precisely what Nehemiah did. His statement, I'm doing a great work, wasn't focused on the distractions. It was focused on his yes, the thing he had said yes to. And he said, look, I'm gonna allow this yes, this terrifying longing that's driving me to this yes, to crowd out everything else. Now, Nehemiah's longing, it ended up serving as the thing that caused him to have laser focus, but it also sustained that. It sustained his focus on that vision. And here's why, this is what I believe. Because I believe great work is found just on the other side of a terrifying longing. And so I'm gonna come back to this in a minute, but I just want you to think for a second, like inside of you, like there is a burden somewhere. There's a longing for something. Some of you are discontent with where you are or what you're involved in. You've thought regularly, there has to be much more to life than this. And that's that deep, intense desire that often emerges when we start questioning our circumstances, or you find yourself dissatisfied with your current reality. It's pointing to something, a terrifying longing inside of you. And here's the thing, great work is just on the other side of that when we follow it. Here's the problem in our society. We become accustomed to medicating and numbing ourselves from sadness and from longing inside of us because it's too terrifying. It's too much of a risk. There's too much not only distraction, but there's too much resistance and opposition to the thing that kind of burdens us on the inside. And some of you have a terrifying longing that you've tried to manage down, and you've tried to numb, and you've tried to deny for years and for years. And a longing for more, in reality, it can be terrifying because it often leads us outside of our comfort zones. It leads us into uncertainty. It causes us to have to embrace change and pursue greater meaning and fulfillment. A terrifying longing, if you're going, well, how do I name that? How do I determine what that is? Well, it involves three things. A terrifying longing involves a problem. For Nehemiah, it was the torn down walls. It requires a possibility. Nehemiah didn't know it was possible, but with the king's help, rebuilding the walls was possible. And then Nehemiah's burden, he has this passion to see his people restored, to see the wall restored. And here's the thing, at the intersection of this, at the intersection of passion and purpose and possibility, we discover a terrifying longing. And that terrifying longing actually leads to vision. In Andy's book, Visioneering, it's a great read. I commend it to you as well. It's an incredible book years ago. He says that vision always begins as a solution to a problem. When you think about your kids growing up in a difficult world, you think about how you want to raise your kids and how you want to launch them one day. You're looking for a solution to that problem. When you look at the divorce rates that plague our nation and the difficulty people have in staying in a marriage and thriving and living with a partner as a lifelong partner, I mean, there's a problem there that needs to be addressed, and you're looking for a solution, having a vision for something. For a relationship, for an organization, for being at a better place or a different place in life, it always begins as a solution to a problem. The problem is what is. It's what is. The possibility is what could be. And our passion is what inside of us causes us to say, this not only could be, but this should be. And our passion drives us because of the terrifying longing inside of us. And Nehemiah decides he needs to focus on the ruins. The walls need to be rebuilt, and his heart's broken by this. And so what comes on the other side of that for Nehemiah is his great work. He's decided, this is the great work that's worthy of my life, and I'm gonna give my life to this great work. Now, here's the thing. This is the question I have for you. What's your great work? Not what fills your time each day, or what do you spend the most of the time doing. I mean, that might be your great work, but it might not be. What's the thing that the terrifying longing inside of you has driven you to grab onto, to move toward, that you've decided at all costs, I'm gonna build this wall? What are you building? Or who are you building? Regardless of your season, here's what I believe. I believe God has something great for you in the season that you're in. Ephesians 2:10, we've looked at these verses before. It says, for we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. Did you know that you are God's handiwork and he has prepared in advance for you to do something great? If you don't believe that, that's not just because you don't believe in yourself or you don't have confidence to pursue the great work that God has for you. That in some ways is you discounting the handiwork of God. God didn't make a mistake when he made you. He gave you the gifts and the talents and the skills he did. And he's prepared you for the great work that he has ahead of you. And I'll just say this, if you're here and you're with us or you're joining us online or you're one of our other locations and you're not a Jesus follower, I'm so glad you're here. For some of you, you've felt stuck for a really long time. And you felt aimless, and you found yourself wondering, there has to be more in life. And the things that you thought were gonna fulfill you didn't end up fulfilling you. And is it possible? Is it possible this is why? Is it possible because that you've chased after the things that aren't the good work that God, when he created you, that you might be the handiwork of God, and that when he created you, he intended for you to do? I believe that's possible. And often these good works, by the way, we romanticize this and we glorify it in our cultures, but often these good works are connected to roles we've already been given, which are also the things that we routinely get our continuous partial attention. It's like the humans we're taking care of in our homes and the roles and the jobs that we have. But here's the thing, by focusing on the good work God's given us, the stuff he's already entrusted to you, he might lead you to a great work, or it might be the great work. Focusing on that, even if you don't think it's great work, or if somebody else hasn't glorified your great work. I just want to say this for parents, for teachers, for coaches, for mentors. Investing in the next generation is great work. Marketplace leaders, creating meaningful jobs for people that provides necessary income so they can put food on the tables of their homes so they can eat and live indoors. I mean, that is great work. For our nonprofit leaders who we love to partner with, serving under-resourced or marginalized people in our communities and around the world is great work. When you approach, Colossians 3 says, when you approach whatever you do with all your heart and you do it as unto the Lord, you're doing great work. It's not always about going and finding some new great thing to do. Sometimes, however, like in Nehemiah's case, God intends for us to do something else. And maybe some of the things that are in front of you, maybe the job you have, maybe the things you're spending your time doing when you're not at work or providing for your family or whatever it is, they're actually distracting you from the great work that God has for you. And that can be scary. Nehemiah, he didn't actually set out to do something great. He was just moved by his terrifying longing. He didn't set out to do something great. In fact, Nehemiah left a great job. I mean, he's right next to the king. He's trusted by the king. We don't know how he got there, but he's in a high, prestigious role in the kingdom. And he left that to walk toward a mess. A mess. The people, the nation was in ruins. They weren't doing what they needed to do, and the nation was far from being restored. But it was his terrifying longing that provided him with the courage to follow God into doing the great work that he had for him in the beginning. Now, before we close, it would be amiss for me not to mention the extraordinary example of this, an extraordinary example of this that's profoundly impacted many of us. In fact, it's profoundly impacted my life. 28 years ago, after watching too many people walk away from their faith, after watching too many people say no to Jesus for unnecessary reasons, 6 people had a terrifying longing. They had a terrifying longing to draw bigger circles, uncomfortably sized, large circles, like the size of circles that Jesus drew. And from the very beginning, there was opposition. There was no shortage of distractions similar to Nehemiah. And for 25 of those 28 years, I've had a front row seat to watch the leaders who launched into this, following their terrifying longing in the beginning, seeing the great work that they've committed themselves to, the great work they refused to come down from, and the great work that has impacted an immeasurable number of people in this city, across the nation, and around the world. Their courage and focus serves as an incredible illustration for us of what's possible when you allow God to grip your heart with a terrifying longing. When you see a problem that exists in the world and you think, that's what is, but that's not what could be. And you begin to dream, and God places something in your heart, a dream in your heart. You begin to see that what could be is better than what is. And it not only could be, but you have a passion that it should be. That's when God's leading in your heart. And here's the thing I want you to know today. God's placed something like that in all of us. I don't know what it is for you, but I want you to know that great work is found just on the other side of that terrifying longing. So I pray that question, what your great work is, what your terrifying longing is, I pray it would bother you. May God sensitize your heart to the longing he's placed inside of you. May you discover or rediscover the clarity regarding the great work that God has for you, whether it's the work he has right in front of you or some other work that he's leading you toward. That because of his handiwork, he's prepared you in advance to do. May God lead you to do whatever you do. Whatever he's given and placed in your hands right now, to do with all your heart and is unto the Lord. And may you stay fueled and focused by your terrifying longing inside of you, even in the face of distraction, to courageously declare, I'm doing a great work and I can't come down. I'm doing a great work and I can't come down. These people need me. This next generation needs me. This organization needs me. We're doing great work and we can't come down. We're shining a light for Jesus in our community. We can't come down. Whatever it is that you placed your hands to, may it be the great work that God prepared in advance for you to do. And may you stay focused on it for the rest of your days. Let's pray together. God, thank you today for this story of Nehemiah. Thank you for the blueprint it's given us. Thank you for the illustration of some people who were really, really faithful to care about people who didn't go to church, who were burdened because there were plenty of churches, but not churches that people that were far from you wanted to go to. Thank you that 28 years ago, they risked by leaving good jobs, gainful employment, prepared for their family. And they chose to follow the terrifying longing inside of them to create the sort of environments that have benefited so many of us, so many of our families. God, I can only imagine there's people in the sound of my voice that you've placed something great inside of them. And maybe today, maybe you're stirring today. Maybe you're awakening today. You're unlocking that thing in their heart. God, I pray today that you would give them the clarity as to what you want them to do next, what the next right step is. I pray you give them the courage to take a step in that direction. And then I pray you give them the focus to stay focused on that, to follow you in your time and at your pace, but to follow you in that and stay focused on it so that you can do the great work that you want to do through them. And I pray it in Jesus' name.